This video console will be channeled into the store of her choice.
Why does new technology succeed or fail? And how grounded in reality is most people's perception of that success or failure? This is Acorn Cinema, I'm Ed, and we're going to step away from game reviews for today to talk about something that has annoyed the ever-loving shit out of me for decades. Bad defaults. Or how new tech keeps fucking itself. Every time new tech launches, there's a corporate game of musical chairs. Who will get there first, who will be the best, or will it even work at all? Oh no. Will it make billions or seemingly fizzle out? If so, will it be dead forever, or come back in 10 or 20 years with a next-gen version? Will it be called that dreaded word, fad? The problem is that when it comes to new tech, the public discourse around what's actually happening is usually about as accurate as Russian air defense. This is the ongoing case of perception v reality, where people always talk about new tech as either game changers or useless fads, often without any real understanding of why something succeeds or fails. Or, contrary to popular opinion, if it even failed at all. Whether it's the new tech itself, the company trying to sell the new tech, or the customer buying and using the new tech, there's usually something missing every step of the way, and that's common sense. It's not just about the tech, it's about customers, or people, and a company's ability to anticipate those people.
Beating people up makes me happy!
Anticipate their preferences, their likes and dislikes, their familiarity with a concept or product, and above all, how stupid and lazy they are.
Who was the first person to land on the sun?
Lance
Armstrong is correct.
Some people are really fucking stupid.
And the sad truth is, at least half of everyone is kind of stupid. Or worse.
Think of how stupid the average person is, and then realize half of them are stupider than that.
What is the biggest city in the world?
I think it's like Asia?
And kind of lazy. Or worse. And on top of that, all their dumb lazy thoughts are attached to dumb lazy feelings. That might sound harsh, but the reality is that it's fucking true.
What country is the Panama Canal in?
Italy. This guy is fucking stupid!
This does not require a genius scientist or technician to understand and anticipate. It requires... common sense, man! One of the biggest problems large companies have, especially tech companies, is they have no common sense, man.
Right. So stick with 360, that's your message if you don't like it?
If you...
One of the greatest modern examples of a common sense man is Steve Jobs. He wasn't the genius tech or programmer, that was Wozniak. Steve was the stand-in for the user, pointing out to the geniuses what the consumer would and would not understand, and thus utilize properly.
Super easy to use. This is what iPhone is. Okay?
Something that even brilliant scientists and technicians are notoriously bad at. The program or interface doesn't just have to technically work, it also has to be foolproof enough that the user knows how to use it.
And it's as easy to use as this Macintosh.
If they don't, then grading by results, you could just as well assume that it doesn't work at all. This is what made Steve Jobs successful. He could stand in for the customer. He had technical empathy. He was common sense man. This is what tech companies are usually missing when they launch new products. You see, new tech often has two options, or modes, that usually breaks down to works mode and done fucking work mode. And something as simple as setting the defaults to works mode instead of done work becomes the Achilles heel of launching new tech. And how that new tech is perceived. Common Sense Man's #1 job is to act as guardrails, making sure obvious mistakes like defaulting to done work mode don't happen. Even worse, sometimes new tech releases without a work mode at all. And most of these problems stem from the worst default of all, having no common sense man in the first place. And this isn't just true for tech. Even businesses outside of tech falter without a common sense man. You're still choosing between work mode and done work mode. But unlike many products that fall under art or music or fashion, which for thousands of years have been long and short-term fads that come and go at the whims of the consumer, technology is quite different. Because unlike fads, technology is inevitable. But unfortunately, so is human stupidity.
How many inches are in 2 feet?
2 inches.
What is the biggest city in the world?
Europe.
God damn, there's a lot of stupid bastards walking around.
And without common sense, man, that inevitable technology cannot anticipate inevitable stupidity and laziness. And that's how you end up with bad defaults. Let's look at an obvious bad default with a basic hypothetical. Let's say it's at least 30 years ago, and someone's selling a computer that comes with DOS and Windows. When the user boots it up for the first time, it defaults to DOS. The user doesn't know DOS. The user can't make heads or tails of the instruction manual clearly meant for a technician.
Computer.
The user never figures out how to use it well enough to navigate the system settings and boot it back up in Windows.
Yep, buttons.
And ultimately, never ends up being able to use it at all. Their friend asks them, "How's the computer?" And they say, "It sucks. It doesn't work. It's a gimmick. It's a fad." I knew it. It's a gimmick. It's a fad.
Computer.
Is it technically their fault that it didn't work? Sure, technically. But it's ultimately the company's fault for not anticipating the abilities of the customer. Because this isn't the customer. This is the customer.
Do you know what 2 countries border the USA?
No.
No.
Like what's on top of us and what's below us?
Isn't the North Pole below us?
No.
What is above us? Is it Europe?
It's the company's fault for not making it foolproof, for not defaulting it to work mode. Another hypothetical bad default is something that lacks a necessary option entirely. Imagine a company is selling a tool that, for whatever reason, only works in your left hand, and then never releases a right-handed version. Oops. These two hypotheticals might sound stupid, but when it comes to tech, this shit happens all the time. Let's look at some modern video games as an example. The Walking Zombie 2. It's another low-poly first-person zombie shooter. And it launched without the option to invert Y-axis, meaning aiming up and down, effectively guaranteeing that half the potential users couldn't play it, leading to half the user reviews taking the place of Common Sense Man. How do you fuck that up? Now I know what you're thinking. Oh, Walking Zombie 2, that's like a up-res cell phone game. It's a small dev team, tiny independent company. That wouldn't happen in a mainstream release. Look at Fall Guys, released in 2020, made by Epic, a AAA publisher with billions of dollars and some of the most genius technicians to ever walk the earth. And they launched a third-person competitive platformer without an invert Y-axis option.
You are the dumbest smart person I have ever met in my life.
Nice.
I remember looking forward to that game. I would have gotten into that game, but they wouldn't let me. And by the time they patched it weeks later, I was kind of busy. You know, I did ultimately eventually down the line get around to it, but they lost their opportunity to hook me. When a game is new, it is in the most recent on anyone's online store. If you don't fix it for weeks or months or whatever, a lot of people will have forgotten about it. You've lost your launch window. You had no common sense, man. Last year, PS5 Pro was announced, and in their introduction video explaining, what it does and yada yada, Mark Cerny, the much beloved soft-spoken hardware development head at PlayStation, said this.
When asked to decide on a mode, players are choosing performance about 3/4 of the time.
That number is wrong. No, 75% of your players do not prefer performance mode, because 100% of your players don't even know there are modes to choose from. Not everyone watches Digital Foundry. Not everyone had a mid-gen console last gen that kind of introduced the ideas of different graphic modes on consoles. Not everyone pays attention to these things. Not everyone checks options. Do you really think the 25% of people that played at 30 FPS in quality mode wanted to? Because no. A lot of people that are playing these things, they plug it in, they just start playing, and whatever it is what they're gonna play. I remember booting up Horizon Forbidden West for the first time, and it defaulted to quality mode. And keep in mind, it had been out for 2 years at this point. The performance issues had been patched. The image quality issues had been patched. Any common sense man would have told you to default it to performance mode, but they didn't. which means anyone who didn't know, or any kid whose parents set it up for them who's never heard of the word options, is gonna have no idea. By far, most of them would rather be playing the smoother mode, but 25% of them did not choose quality mode. Only a percentage of that 25% chose quality mode. Sony assumed the average consumer knew what they were doing, but the average consumer is this person.
What 33 divided by 3 is?
Probably like from 5 to 10.
Mark Cerny is a brilliant tech, but he is not common sense man, and you can't have a Wozniak without a Jobs. That being said, I very much look forward to Sony's inevitable collaboration with Audible and Cerny's reading of Goodnight Moon. And in case you think I'm being too hard on Sony, even NASA has fucked this up. In 1999, NASA's Mars Climate Orbiter crashed into Mars. Did it happen because NASA was bad at math? Did it happen because NASA just couldn't afford the good shit? No. It happened because one of their teams was using the metric system, and the other team wasn't. And they didn't realize it until it crashed. It wasn't because they weren't smart enough. It wasn't because they didn't try hard enough. 99.99999% of the time and energy, effort, and expense was done right, and it failed because they didn't have a common sense man to pick up the phone and say, hey, you using the metric system? Without a common sense man, many tech companies have trouble taking one step forward without taking one or more steps back.
I'm upset with myself.
How many times have you bought a smart TV where it works on a technical level just fine, maybe even better than any TV you had prior, but the quote-unquote smart interface is such a mess and the overly streamlined remote so useless that doing anything as simple as changing inputs takes 10 times the effort it used to on an old dumb TV. Ugh! These are the mistakes Steve Jobs would not have made, especially when designing an interface or controller. Remember these? Yeah. This is really my first experience with the frustration of bad defaults, and what it demonstrated regarding people's perceptions. The Wiimotes. They came with the Nintendo Wii, which for over a year we all couldn't wait to get our hands on. Nintendo showed us how we can play games in a whole new way, aim and turn with a Wiimote, and it would totally work. And guess what? It did! It did totally work. That's it! But that wasn't the perception, so what happened? Well, I'll tell you what happened. I got mine at launch, put in Call of Duty 3, first-person shooter meant to be used with the Wiimote like a gun, and noticed in the first 10 seconds that it was kinda hard to turn. So you know what I did? I checked options, I adjusted the bounding box, and in a couple of minutes I was having the time of my life. It worked just fine. See, for those who don't know, a bounding box is what you have in motion control shooters, like Call of Duty, or really any first or third person shooter on the Wii. You adjust the horizontal and vertical limits of the box, so the game knows how far you can aim before you start turning. In some games it's a slider, in other games it's a general size option, and in some you can literally see the box as you adjust it. Other options are par for the course for any shooter on any system, like at what speed you will turn and so on and so forth. Once you've done that, this happens. Once you adjust the bounding box, it works great if you know what a bounding box is, if you check options, if you know what most people didn't do? Check motherfucking options. Ugh. Here's a conversation I had at least 25 times. Hey, did you play the Wii? Yeah. It's great, isn't it? No, it sucks. What do you mean? Dude, you can't control, you can't turn. Well, what happened when you adjusted the bounding box? What's a bounding box? Not one person I ever talked to who said they didn't like it and said it didn't control well knew what a bounding box was. Not one.
Oh dear.
Not one of them, after waiting over a year for this console, shelling out $250 for this console, bothered to take 3 minutes to check options and adjust a bounding box. Instead, they just said, "No, it sucks." And that was the end of it. Now, is it their fault for not knowing what a bounding box is? Is it their fault for not checking options? Sure, technically it is. But it was Nintendo's fault for not anticipating that. It was Nintendo's fault for not defaulting the bounding box to something smaller. All those initial Wii shooters defaulted to a wide bounding box, which is kind of a pain to control. You shrink that shit and it controls just great, but it takes all of 3 minutes and a slight bit of intuition to figure out. And Nintendo did not anticipate that. Nintendo had no common sense, man. Nintendo assumed people would be smart enough to figure it out on their own, because they've never met people.
How many moons does the Earth have?
9. 11.
9 or 11, you're close.
I'm close to, like, it's in between 9 and 11.
If they had advertised and explained what a bounding box was, if they had just put learning what a bounding box is and how to adjust it in the first level tutorial of these games, then the perception that it did not control well would not have been a problem. But that is the problem with perception v reality. It doesn't matter if it works if the user doesn't know that it works. It doesn't matter if there's a works mode if it defaults to done work mode. By the end of the Wii's life cycle, Nintendo had learned the hard way, and most developers knew by then to default to a smaller bounding box. But it didn't matter, because the public perception that it didn't work was already set in stone. To this day, the best third-person shooter I've ever played is Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition, and if you ask anyone who's ever played it, they'll tell you the same thing. There was, however, one culprit that goes beyond bad defaults, and that's Red Steel, made by Ubisoft. It was the game first advertised for the Wii. It was the game that was, above all others, used as a demonstration of what the Wii was capable of. And it was a hunk of shit. Not only was the bounding box extremely wide, but you couldn't adjust it. All you could do was change your turn sensitivity, which fixed nothing. The aiming was also completely fucked for reasons still unknown to this day. On every other Wii shooter, the aiming reticle works just fine. But in Red Steel, it bounces all over the place like a broken alpha build. It's really just unplayable, in a way no other Wii shooter was. And yet, this was the game that Nintendo decided to hang their hat on. And keep in mind, the Wii didn't have patches, so if it was broken at release, it was broken forever. If Nintendo had a common sense, man, Red Steel would have never been allowed to release in this state, especially as a console launch game. But they didn't, so Red Steel was free to destroy the Wii's public perception at launch. Thanks, Ubisoft.
Get what you fucking deserve!
Yeah. In the end, if it hadn't been for games like Wii Sports and other non-shooters, the Wii would have been a financial disaster. Fortunately for Nintendo, they had tennis and bowling. It doesn't help that the well was poisoned by motion controls that genuinely didn't work well, namely these. These are the PlayStation Move controllers that were sold for PS3. Sony's rushed attempt to capture some of that sweet Nintendo Wii money. Only to save time and money, they never developed a PS3 camera or sensor bar to go with it. They just made it compatible with the existing PlayStation 2 camera, a piece of tech that was already outdated. This led to the PS Move controllers having slower reticle frame rates along with a significant delay, so aiming wasn't smooth or real-time, like the Wiimotes were. As a result, the PS3 motion controllers were kinda ass. No, the bad kind. The problem is that when it comes to art or tech, people often mistake a technical failure with a conceptual one, meaning they blame the medium instead of the individual product. How many times has a bad superhero movie come out and bomb, and people say, I guess people aren't into superhero movies anymore. And then a few months later, a good one comes out and makes $1 billion. It's the quality, stupid. This happens in tech all the time. People said the PS3 motion controllers sucked because motion controls sucked. But no, those motion controls sucked. These work just fine. But when it comes to the masses, facts rarely get in the way of perception. Even to this day, the perception v reality of motion controls is just as bad. Ask anyone, did motion controls fail? They'll say, yeah. Ask them, was it a fad? They'll say, yeah. Except It isn't. There are more motion controls from more brands on more platforms sold today than even at the height of the Wii's popularity. The Switch, Nintendo's current console, comes with motion controls that do the same thing the original did, just without a sensor bar. Every VR controller is a motion controller. There are gyroscopes in all of your phones, and people play games on them with motion controls every day. Even on PlayStation, I'm playing Black Ops 6 online right now with the motion controls, because those physical adjustments are better aiming than a joystick. Especially if you're playing a sniper. Motion controls are still sold in gaming in higher numbers than ever before, and the perception is that they died out and went away. This is one of the widest chasms between perception and reality. But regardless, it doesn't change reality. Sure, things aren't the same as they would have been if the perception back then was more reality-based. There would be more flat games, meaning non-VR, that use motion controls for first-person shooters. Sadly, few do. But even then, that's not forever.
Message!
Then there's the Kinect. We don't need to go there. Moving on. The modern 3D movie and TV era started with Avatar in 2009, a movie that had a common sense man, James Cameron. He didn't just shoot the movie in 3D, which meant the 3D looked fine, but he also made sure theaters could only show it if they were using the right bulbs. Now, not everyone knows this, but 3D has different requirements than a 2D movie. If you're showing two images, one plastered over the other, you need a bulb that's twice as bright as the one you need for one image. That's why no one complained about Avatar being too dark. After Avatar's success, every lazy studio wanted to get a 3D movie out there as soon as possible. They wanted that extra charge that came with a 3D ticket. So what did they do? Well, the first thing they did is they took 2D movies and did artificial conversions to 3D, which today is fine. And for most of 3D conversion, it's actually been fine. But in that initial 18 months, that first generation of 2D to 3D conversion was terrible. And like all tech, most of the consumer market was gonna judge the forever potential of that tech based on their first impressions of it. The other, more egregious problem, because it went on a hell of a lot longer than 18 months, is lazy theaters would just take their existing bulbs meant for 2D movies and show 3D movies on them, making them dark. The worst offender of this was Clash of the Titans. Remember Clash of the Titans? And that's what most studios and theaters did in the early days of 3D. They had no common sense, man. They had no good defaults. And 3D fell victim to the same bad perception v reality that always happens because no one anticipated that the consumers would know the difference. They didn't blame the studio. They didn't blame the theater. They blamed 3D. They said 3D sucked. It's a gimmick. It's a fad. And as far as the market was concerned, their perception might as well be reality, because that's what drives sales. This has actually been going on a while, long before Avatar. The first 3D films were from the 20s, over a century ago, and the first 3D TVs were made in the mid-40s. It wasn't exactly a mass-produced consumer product, but it worked. And the tech has oscillated between coming and going, on and off, ever since. It never completely goes away, but as far as people's perceptions, it kind of comes and goes every 20 years or so.
Amityville 3D.
Each time it comes back, it's a little easier for the filmmakers to use, it's a little cheaper to do, the tech's a little better, but when it's not there yet, people say, oh, it's a fad, and it will always be a fad. And until 3D TVs have the same price and convenience as 2D TVs, they won't have the same market penetration. But don't fool yourself. In the end, they will. It's
inevitable.
because that's how tech works.
I said I'd be back.
And this has effectively happened with all eras of TV and movies. First, sound was a special thing that was expensive to do and didn't sound great and was only for special occasions until it wasn't.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet.
And then sound was ubiquitous with film. The same went for higher resolutions, color, widescreen, so on and so forth.
You're taking it to a whole other level. Yep.
Most people alive today don't remember it, but there was a time when something like color was so special that it was just reserved for the big ones. But if the next year you would just release some rom-com in high resolution, widescreen, and color, people would have said, sure, it was okay, but did it really need to be in color? Now? Can you imagine walking out of a movie theater and thinking, it was alright, but did it need to be in color? Did it need to be in widescreen? And before you roll your eyes and think, oh, you know so much better because of hindsight, one day, many years from now, you'll be watching the latest Jennifer Aniston rom-com on Netflix with your grandkids on a no-glasses 3D TV. And when it's over, you'll say, well, it was okay, but did it really need to be in 3D? And they'll say, oh, Grandma, shut the fuck up. Returning to the present day and the ongoing case of perception v reality, you can watch Deadpool and Wolverine in theaters, on Blu-ray, and on Disney Plus in 3D. So if it's a fad that failed, why is it still here? Yes, in the West, there is a definite slump in the production of 3D TVs, but that doesn't mean it's gone, now or forever. The truth is that regardless of the current state of 3D TV sales, there are actually more stereoscopic screens sold today in consumer products than ever before. And it's increased in sales every year since people had already announced it was dead. Because, in case you forgot, oh yeah. Bad VR defaults suffered from the same lack of a common sense man that motion controls did, leading to many of the very same issues of perception v reality. A perception based around comfort options. For those who don't know, the purpose of comfort options are to prevent nausea. This can happen when someone is new to VR, and moving and turning in a world whose resolution and frame rate are less than that of the real world, while your body remains in place, can make some people queasy before they've had time to get their VR legs, the equivalent of sea legs. The first type of bad defaults regarding comfort options are locomotion options, meaning moving and turning. The alternative option to normal movement is teleporting, effectively jumping from spot to spot. And the alternative to normal turning is click turning, sudden movements right or left like on a pie chart. The biggest problem VR faced, especially in that initial 18 months, is that even though they were just options, most people didn't know that. And the developers and advertisers didn't explain that. And most games usually defaulted to teleportation and click turning. And since most people are too stupid and lazy to check options, that led most people in those early days of VR to think that was the only way you could play. At the risk of sounding redundant, here's a conversation I had various versions of more times than I care to remember. Hey, did you play Arizona Sunshine? Yeah. Isn't it great with the aim controller? It's okay, I guess. I just wish I didn't have to teleport and click turn. What do you mean? I played through the whole game without teleporting or click turning. Oh. Did you check options? No. It doesn't help that many VR games launched with trailers that gave people the impression that teleportation was the only way to move, and the comments under those videos show people getting it wrong, as expected, as always. Even professionals demoing these games often didn't know better, didn't bother checking options, and inevitably spread bad information.
It controls very, very differently to regular Skyrim because you teleport. That is a weird way to play Skyrim though, because a lot of the paths that you're moving around are dungeons that have really, really narrow hallways, so having to kind of shift between those in such a choppy motion is a little bit odd, and I don't know that I love it.
You can't spell ignorant without IGN. But of course, Bethesda brought this on themselves. The employee managing the demo didn't explain it, and if you scroll down to the comments, you get the inevitable result. That teleporting! Who the hell wanna play like that? You don't have to, just check options. Point and click equals no buy. No check option equals no brain. The point and click crap is so lame. Then don't do that, it's just an option. Why is there seriously no option to change it to normal walking instead of teleporting? There is! Just check options, you fucking retard! I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just fucking... Oh, Jesus fucking... I wish there were a proper hate group for people who hated stupid people. I would be the Grand Dragon. Ugh. Sadly enough, Skyrim VR did in fact launch with click turning as the only option to turn, until normal turning was patched in a month later. Because even though their game launched years earlier with normal turning, they didn't know to put it in the VR version until their own fucking customers had to tell them to. Because Bethesda. How did the advertisers let this happen? Because they had no common sense, man. How did Bethesda let the advertisers let this happen? Because they had no common sense, man. How did Sony let Bethesda let the advertisers let this happen? Because they had no common sense, man. Because why would any billion-dollar tech company have any goddamn common sense? The second type of bad defaults for VR are visual comfort options, usually in the form of blinders, blinding the player to part of the screen. You can see these in many demos, where much if not most of the screen goes dark as soon as the player moves, often making it hard for the player to see what they're even doing. It's something most people hate and turn them off as soon as they start playing. That is, if they check options. Now, in just about every game after that initial 18 months, blinders are optional. And in almost every game in that initial 18 months, blinders are optional, but sometimes they weren't. One of the worst examples of this was Eagle Flight, and this one breaks my heart. Eagle Flight should have and could have been a truly great game. I kinda almost had the opportunity to love it, but Ubisoft wouldn't let me. You move and turn with your head, and the flying controls are really kind of amazing. You fly around an open world full of activities and missions and, you know, Ubisoft. The only problem is you can't see what the fuck you're doing because of some of the worst, most obtrusive blinders in any fucking game. And you can't turn them the fuck off. First off, you've got the eagle's brow covering the periphery of the entire frame. It's kind of hard to see on the 2D social screen here, but you can see the top of it right there. And even worse, every time you turn, half the screen goes black. And every time you speed up, most of the screen goes black. I can't see what the fuck I'm doing. The developers clearly were worried about inducing nausea. And in overcompensating for that, they didn't just make some of the worst blinders ever, but they didn't give you the option to turn them the fuck off, effectively ruining the game. Without those goddamn blinders, this would have been one of my favorite VR games of all time. It would have been at least a 9.0, if not a 9.5. It really was, or should have been, that good. But with those fucking blinders, at best, it's between a 4 or 5 out of 10. It's like if you were watching a great 10 out of 10 movie that you love, but the whole time, there's a hamster chewing your balls. It's like, yeah, I can appreciate how good this is, but god damn it, I'm just having trouble actually enjoying it right now. And if you look in the comments on any forum, this was a universal problem. Everyone hated the blinders. Everyone wanted an option patched in so they could turn them off. If Ubisoft had any fucking common sense, if they had ever read one forum, if they listened to one goddamn comment from anybody who ever played their fucking game, they would have turned it off. But they didn't. And as a result, they pissed money down the drain, threw away what could have been a great new franchise, and above all, released a game in the initial VR launch window that gave everyone the wrong impression of VR. Gave everyone the impression that this blinders bullshit that you couldn't turn off was just how you had to play VR games. Further damaging and hampering the initial perception of VR. Thanks, Ubisoft.
Get what you fucking deserve!
Yeah. Another example of this was Dirt Rally.
Keep left over crest.
One of the earlier full AAA games you could play in VR. It should have been one of the heaviest hitters of that first gen of VR games, but it wasn't, because it had maybe the worst blinders ever made for any VR game ever. Anytime you hit so much as a speed bump, or got any airtime, or tapped anything, most of the screen went dark, causing you to drive off the road and crash.
Into left 6.
It effectively made the game unplayable. And you couldn't turn those blinders the fuck off. Same thing with Eagle Flight. Look at the forums. All anyone wanted was to be able to turn that off, but they couldn't. And of course, they never patched in the option to turn it off. It was effectively broken forever and just unplayable.
jump into right 4 long.
Even the demo disc that came with PSVR had this problem. The one full locomotion game on it, Scavenger's Odyssey, had horrible blinders that you couldn't turn off. And since PSVR was by far the highest selling VR platform of that first generation, that meant that most people's first impressions of full locomotion in VR was that you needed horrible obtrusive blinders that you could not turn off. How do you fuck that up? How do you have no common sense? All these botched default options, or lack of options entirely in that initial 18 months, did more than just confuse people as to how you would play VR, but also what it would do to you. This poorly managed focus on comfort led many people who had never used VR to think that any game with locomotion in it, be it manual or even on rails, would make the player nauseous, when in fact, most people don't get nauseous in VR. And those who initially do will almost always develop their VR legs if they don't bitch out after their first attempt. And even if someone is in that incredibly small percentage that can't get their VR legs yet, every generation gets easier. Every generation, the resolution increases, the frame rate increases as well as being more consistent or locked, and with it, the comfort issue decreases. Ironically, teleportation and blinders often induce nausea in people who otherwise would never get nauseous, creating the very problem they were trying to avoid. Ugh. It doesn't help that in the initial 18 months, many developers had to be told by their customers that they wouldn't even buy a game if teleportation and click turning were the only options. This happened with Arizona Sunshine on PC VR before it came to PSVR, and countless other games. Even Doom VFR had to patch in proper locomotion. Ugh. But even when it didn't happen, even when the options were there, developers rarely bothered to advertise it. And the damage to early sales and perceptions of their product was a completely self-inflicted wound. That is still visible to this day in the downvotes and comments on most trailers for games with full locomotion in them from that initial 18 months. And it wasn't just the general public that got confused, but even so-called professional reviewers would get this wrong. One of the most famous examples of this was IGN's review of Borderlands 2 VR, a review that released a 3 out of 10 score, complaining about the terrible blinders and locomotion. Something that was completely optional, but the reviewer never checked fucking options. You can't spell ignorant without IGN. Of course, people noticed this right away, and IGN quickly took down the review, replacing it with a new, still bad, tepid one, which is ridiculous, because to this day, Borderlands 2 VR with the aim controller is the greatest anything with the name Borderlands in it on any platform. Fight me. The problem is, whether you patch in work mode or even launch with a work mode, as most did, you still have to advertise it in such a way that the customer is aware that the work mode even exists. You cannot depend on the customer to figure it out. This is the customer!
What country did we gain our independence from?
Russia.
You know what 15% of 100 is? Around what it is, if you had to guess.
Probably like 75.
What country is the Queen of England from?
I definitely don't know.
And because of this, trailers and public demos were allowed to confuse stupid, lazy customers and even reviewers misrepresenting their product. And when it comes to new tech, every time that misrepresentation happens, people call it a gimmick. Hindsight is 20/20, but what you call a gimmick or fad today might be a permanent staple tomorrow.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
A few moments later.
We'll have 9 phones available when the Windows Phone ships here in the United States in November. 9 different phones.
If you're talking about anything other than technology, there is no obvious right answer in real time. But if you are talking about technology, you're pretty much only ever right in the short term, and always wrong in the long term.
Don't cry.
Even if you don't live long enough to see it. Because technology is
inevitable.
Anyone remember when Prince said the internet was a fad? Yeah. When the Wright brothers tested their first plane, it could barely handle short distances with almost no added weight. It was first-gen tech with no commercial or military application. Barely 12 years later, you had this. So when do people perceive technology as a gimmick? We've already covered this concept in film, where changes in everything from sound to color and so on were first seen as gimmicks. But what's important to note is that when these things were first shown to a mass audience, they were indeed first-generation versions, often of rough quality, so calling them gimmicks was much more understandable. But what is often the problem when it comes to more modern tech is people's perceptions that they're judging first-gen products, when in fact, it isn't first gen. Since we just covered VR, let's use it as an example. This is the Sensorama. It's the first gen VR, and it came out in 1957, patented in 62. It's completely passive, there's no computer hooked up to it, you can't control anything, there's no head tracking, but it was full 3D, not flat 3D. It was, by all rights, VR. Was it gimmicky-ish? Sure. Was it little more than a prototype that barely sold any copies? Sure. But it worked. By the 60s, you have a new generation of VR that is now attached to a computer with these fancy new things called microchips. This is your first interactive VR experience, with a machine that can render wireframe polygons, and has a heads-up display, also making it the first AR prototype. By the 80s, you get the next gen, this time with actual real-world commercial and industrial applications, now used by companies like NASA for training, simulations, and development. Now it's a real tool you can use, not just a prototype. Come the 90s, you get the next gen, which is also the first consumer VR.
And you just put the helmet on like that, right? And of course you see that you have a gun in your hand, and to fire the gun, you simply press the trigger.
It wasn't a mass-produced product that you took home, unless you were rich, but you could go to a mall and spend $5 and play one of a couple games, most famously Dactyl Nightmare, which totally worked, and people had fun.
I think I have to take this helmet off. I'm physically feeling the space here for a second. Oh my god.
It even had multiplayer.
You're gone, John. Your history.
Even Sega Genesis made a VR that they announced.
There it is, ladies and gentlemen. The VR headset.
Developed.
The game completely surrounds you. It is the future from Sega.
And then quietly shelved. As I've already mentioned, VR requires a frame rate that is both high and consistent, and preferably at higher resolutions. And in testing, people's stomachs couldn't handle the low frame rate and resolution of the Sega VR. 'Cause shocker, the Genesis wasn't really up for that, using 80s consumer-grade hardware. And no, Virtual Boy was not VR. It wasn't even advertised as VR. It was a 3D Game Boy on your face, not the same thing. By 2013, you're at least another generation beyond that, with the first Oculus dev kits.
Oh, there! Oh my goodness! No, 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 no!
This is unreal.
To have gone from a rotary phone and a black and white TV with no remote and no computers. It was a profound experience for someone my age, and I really almost feel like crying because it's just overwhelming.
By 2016, you get the first mass-produced consumer VR gen, with PSVR, Oculus Vive, and Gear VR. Although technically Gear VR released the previous year, but it was much simpler and you know what I mean. The perception that VR was a gimmick was indeed in large part due to bad defaults, as well as poor advertising. But it was also because it was perceived as first-gen tech, and first-gen tech is often kind of gimmicky-ish. Only it wasn't first-gen tech. It was the first mass-produced consumer gen. But as far as the tech, it was at the very least 6th gen. By 2016, it had been in development for 60 fucking years. That's why it actually worked. These were not the Wright brothers planes. They were B-52s. This extends to a lot of other tech we've already covered. People called them gimmicks because they thought they were to some degree first gen. But that's rarely the case. If you're looking at almost any tech in something like video games, and it's later than the 80s, then chances are the gimmicky-ish first gens were a long time ago.
I love the Power Glove. It's so bad.
Even the Duck Hunt gun wasn't first gen. Nintendo released the first electronic Duck Hunt gun in 1976. You didn't even hook it up to your TV. You played on any surface you wanted. Some of you aren't old enough to remember this, but in the early Atari and Nintendo days, the concept of releasing a new gaming system when a company had already released one years earlier was considered by many to be not just a gimmick, but even a scam.
You'll be glad to know Super Mario 4, called Super Mario World, is now on the shelves, but as Deborah Snell found out, you might not like what you hear when you go to buy the game.
New Super Mario World, created especially for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
That's the catch that may take many Nintendo maniacs by surprise. You have to buy a completely new hardware system to play the new Super Mario 4 game.
Why can't you just buy the cassette?
Because it doesn't play in the regular one. You have to buy the Super unit.
Who's doing that?
And now he has the Nintendo, and now he'd have to have another unit just for that one game? Doesn't seem right.
Nintendo has introduced some hot new toys, but have things gone a bit too far?
At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system, and you can't mix and match. Some parents are refusing to be taken in.
I'm going to say no, and I'm going to explain to him how people market things to make you spend more money.
Yeah. Keep in mind, these people didn't grow up in an era of home computers. They grew up in an era of home appliances that weren't nearly as iterative. They didn't buy computers, they bought toasters. And the only real reason they had to buy a new toaster was their old one didn't work anymore. There wasn't any new and improved bread that only worked in new and improved toasters. Now that's not to say no one understood how new iterative hardware and software worked. Plenty did, but that required actually learning and thinking about it.
Does this really have to cost this much? Where should the anger be directed? Not at the parents, but at the manufacturer.
And not defaulting to one's initial reflexive feelings.
I feel maybe exploited.
Which is hard to do when you're dumb and lazy.
You know what 33 divided by 3 is?
No.
I'll give you this dollar if you can name one continent.
USA.
Who fought in the Civil War?
I don't know that one.
Do you know what's the difference between Mexico and New Mexico?
Nah.
Never underestimate the power of stupid and the stupid, worthless feelings that come with it. Once someone says something, their ego gets attached to that statement. And for most people, it's harder to admit they were wrong than it is to go down with the ship.
Message!
Effectively, the more immature someone's emotions, the more they lose error correction, especially if that correction overlaps with any personal ideology, be it religious, political, or whatever. 'Cause it's all racial. You've seen it before. If someone has an Xbox, then something sucks 'cause it's on PlayStation, and it's for Sony ponies. If someone has a PlayStation, then something sucks 'cause it's for stupid Xbox. No Sony games suck. No Xbox games suck. And we all know it's bullshit. Because the best games are made by Nintendo. Heh, sorry not sorry. But, in general, once an opinion is given, or a statement made, a childish ego sets it in stone. This is especially true if that incorrect statement is in writing, publicly, and kinda around forever. Which is why the social media age has given rise to the dumbest, least mature babies to ever walk the planet.
It is not about creating an intellectual space! It is not!
Since the rise of stupid coincides with a recent technological game changer, let's again use VR as an example. We waited decades for VR, to the point where it was part of the general lexicon and culture long before 2016.
And virtual reality displays show our geneticists the gaps in the DNA sequence.
It was spoken of only in eager anticipation, only ever positive. We just couldn't wait! It was like a Christmas that never came, but somehow still advertised here and there in short spurts, just to toy with us. And then finally, after all those years, it was 2016.
In October 2016.
Do you remember what happened in 2016 when first-gen consumer VR actually came out?
The VR generation started, what, a month ago, and already the downward spiral begins.
I want to talk to you about virtual reality headsets and why I think we really don't need them, okay?
VR is nothing but a gimmick. Yeah, I said it.
PSVR crashed, and I guess VR in general, crashed and burned.
We commit the body of the PlayStation VR and all of its worthless accessories to the peace of the grave.
The PlayStation VR has been such a disappointment that Sony isn't really revealing numbers for it.
Okay, I think a good game, you don't have to have all these gimmicks. You don't have to have these things strapped to your face to be immersed in it.
It's inconvenient for people to put on this big bulky headset and you're surrounded by wires.
But in the end, well, nobody gave a shit.
Jesus. While people actually using VR were having fun, the public perception was hatred.
We don't need all this stuff. Look at this. Look at all this stuff. Look at all this freaking. Like, I don't need this. I don't want this.
Expected sales from 2.3 million down to 750,000, which they won't make that.
This one is particularly stupid.
So why did PSVR flop? And I know some of you are going to disagree and you're going to say, Michael, you don't know what you're talking about.
Michael, you don't know what you're talking about.
From dust you came, and to dust you shall return.
Now I'm only comparing it to other peripherals. The PlayStation VR is not making Guinness Books of World Records. It's not doing anything. They're recessing.
Guys, why do we need all of these headsets? Why can't we just look at a TV screen with a remote like the good old days? Okay?
Until Dawn, so bad.
Until Dawn, Russia Blood was fucking great, you lug nut. I never heard one bad word about it from someone who actually played it.
Oh my god!
I really enjoyed that.
And that's the problem with internet reactionaries. They often have no experience with the product they're actually discussing. And this was a particular issue for VR in the case of Perception v Reality. What was people's perception of VR if they'd never used it?
Why do we have to have these virtual reality headsets? Why do we have to have these gimmicks? Alright?
I don't know how everyone else feels about games titled Star Trek Bridge, but for me, gaming needs to be fun, and from what I've seen, that doesn't look like fun at all.
It looks like the Romulan got discombobulated and exploded.
Well, that's the most erotic thing I've ever seen in Star Trek.
Do you have any free time after this?
I don't need something strapped to my face and me looking around and getting all sweaty, and then when you want to play at the front, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? You're like, hey man, take my eyeballs and stick them on your head, and oh, like what? What are we talking about, guys? Then how do you play with people?
Your phaser's not working.
I swear this has never happened to me before.
Prior to actually using it, many people didn't really get what VR was. They thought it was just a 3D screen on your face. They thought it was Virtual Boy. They didn't quite get the whole holodeck thing.
The only thing I can really compare the PSVR to for add-ons and peripherals is the Xbox Kinect.
Combine that with the whole it's on your box and not my box, so it sucks mentality.
Xbox is the best box and I am the best bot.
Combined further with no one checking options and reporting bad defaults, combined with bad advertising compounding the problem, and you get a public perception claiming it was already dead and buried. While at the same time, it was selling out.
Oh, I like money.
He rocks in the treetop all the day long, hopping and a bopping and a singing his song. All the little birds on Jaybird Street love to hear the robin go tweet, tweet, tweet. Rockin' Robin, tweet, tweet, rockin' Robin, tweet, tweet. Slow rockin' Robin, 'cause we really gonna rock tonight. Tweet, tweet.
Ah, yeah. I like money, though.
This led to further failures of public perception because Sony shifted from advertising the hardware to advertising the software. When hardware is consistently sold out, advertising it is a waste of money, so you put your money into advertising the software. Another example of this was the Wii and the Switch, consoles that were famously sold out in their initial 12 months, so once that happened, Nintendo put the vast majority of their advertising into selling the software, and not the hardware. You don't need to advertise the hardware when it's already selling out. People didn't call them failed consoles, because that wasn't the perception. But when Sony did that, people declared it was already dead. That first consumer gen of VR was far from perfect, and the generations since still have a ways to go. But it's not a failure, and it wasn't a fad. It didn't crash and burn. Exhibit A, it's still fucking here, and it's only gotten better. There are only more brands, because that's how tech works. On PS3 and 4, Skyrim was pretty good. On PSVR, it was the lifelong fulfillment of any dork's childhood dream. On PSVR, Saints and Sinners was kinda janky. On PSVR 2, it's probably the greatest zombie game I've ever played. And Resident Evil 4 Remake in VR, maybe the greatest anything ever. People's stupid, worthless feelings regarding new tech follows the same checklist every time. Step 1, it's not on my thing and I don't have one, so it sucks. Gimmick fad. Step 2, it's on my thing, so here's why it's great and the one on your thing sucks. We even see this with tech demos that aren't even marketed as being anywhere close to a mass-producible consumer product yet. Remember Google Glass?
The $1,500 Google Glass mimics smartphone functions.
Google's early tech demo for wearable AR glasses. You had to enter a waiting list and pay $1,500 just to try an alpha test that barely had any applications. And yet, people declared it a dead fad that no one bought. "12 years later, and people walk around with wearable smart devices like it's old-fashioned already, including ones from Google. There are multiple competing smart glasses, and no one whines about them being fads or gimmicks anymore.
The next generation of smart glasses by Ray-Ban and Meta.
It's already down to whose is better, mine or yours. And no, I'm not talking about that overpriced Max scuba gear. Ugh. Yikes. Keep in mind, these are consumer products we're talking about. What happens when these stupid, worthless feelings regarding new tech aren't coming from some aimless consumer, but instead coming from someone with actual power and influence? Anyone remember this idiot?
Sometimes these dollars, they go to projects having little or nothing to do with the public good. Things like fruit fly research in Paris, France. I kid you not.
And so this all leads us back to studying the orexin gene in the fruit fly to inform us about how it affects the synapse and tell us what we should be understanding, what we should be thinking about in terms of autism. That leads us to thinking about interventions, how we would design interventions, perhaps medications that might specifically address that genetic problem at the synapse.
Fruit fly research in Paris, France. I kid you not.
But this is to be expected. People's stupid, worthless feelings are to be expected. This is par for the course, because when it comes to common sense, bad defaults, and new tech, this always happens. This is the Cunyo steamer. From 1769, it was the first self-propelled vehicle. I mean, this is a replica to show you how it worked. The original's in a museum. It was built for the French army, who didn't really find it useful. 'Cause it wasn't. So they stopped there. But you know what else wasn't useful? 12 years, bitches! 12 years from A to B. What could this have been in 12 years if anyone in that fancy pants army had any goddamn foresight? How many people think electric vehicles aren't just a fad, but new? The first electric vehicles were built almost 200 years ago, in 1832, 44 years before the first internal combustion engine was invented. They weren't mass-market, commercially viable vehicles, of course. Those weren't available until the 1880s, the same time as the combustion models hit the market. They've been around as long as cars have been around. And yet most people today would call them a recent invention, a recent fad. How much further along would that tech be today if we didn't keep hampering its progress by claiming it's just a fad? But this one hurts the most. This is Heron's engine, made by Heron of Alexandria in ancient Roman Egypt. It is the first steam engine, and he used it to do nothing. It was a party trick, a passing fad that amused people until they got distracted by the next shiny object. He did nothing with it. He never combined it with pistons or gears, both of which he knew how to make and use, as did many Romans. But neither he nor anyone else saw the potential. They saw it as entertainment, not technology. It was just a fascination, a party trick, a gimmick. If anyone had iterated on this first model, the Romans would have started the Industrial Revolution 2,000 years ago. If that had happened, we would have already colonized Mars over 1,000 years ago. But we didn't, because as brilliant as Heron was, his Wozniak had no jobs. No one to explain to him and the public what this first-gen tech represented, what it could one day be. Without that common sense man, Heron's engine was just a default with no work mode. Just a curiosity, just a fad. And if there's anything we've learned, it's fads come and go, but technology is inevitable.
How many countries are there in Europe?
I'm pretty sure Europe is a country. No.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm from there.
Oh, you're from Europe?
Yeah.
Where are you from in Europe?
Vancouver. Yeah.
Vancouver.
Yeah, in Europe.